Hello, and welcome back to the Phil Elverum discography breakdown, or Discog breakdown, as the
Mm.
kids say. Um, Once again, I am Alex, and joining me is,
Hello, it's Jake.
and this week we are going to talk about The Glow Part 2, an album that is very difficult to talk about.
Yeah, we've been kind of sitting here for the last 15 minutes trying to just talk about how to talk about it and what order to
Scratching
talk
our
about it.
heads.
And it's truly a difficult and daunting task.
Yeah, I said earlier that it's hard to boil down years of kind of epiphanies and thoughts that I've had about this record, that were kind of based around my own life context into 1 week's worth of note taking.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's really hard to get kind of objective with it.
Yeah. Um. Anyway, last week we read a little segment that Phil wrote on the album, and I have another one, this time from the CD booklet for the record, um, that I would like to read.
Yes.
Says Phil, The Glow Part 2 was recorded over a long period, almost a year, in Olympia, Washington. It was a great time. I lived in a small house 1 block away from Doug Narcotic's studio and had full access to this amazing facility. My daily schedule was to wake up very early, or try, and go to the studio to work on my recordings as the sun came up and filled the big wooden room with morning light. Usually, nobody else arrived at the building until 11 or 12, and so I was able to be alone with my strange ideas. Although there are many names written in the credits to the album, almost everything was done by me. Most of those names appear only on one song, You'll Be in the Air. The recording of the record was a solitary trial and error process where I made mistake after mistake until finally I found a beautiful mistake. Nothing was done quote unquote properly in terms of standard recording practices. I was compelled to try strange things with the instruments and equipment to discover new sounds. The songs were written in my head mostly while walking around Olympia at night alone. My friends and I all lived downtown and rarely needed to drive anywhere. We often ate meals together, saw each other 5 times a day on the sidewalk, offered each other help with projects, and generally felt like we were living in a creative utopia. Everyone was always working on an important art project of some kind. Nobody had a TV. I felt like we had discovered a new world. That is the social atmosphere I was living in, but my own recording projects were solitary and happened in the quiet morning hours. The Glow Part 2 is the third album in my 4 album series by the Microphones, which vaguely corresponds to the 4 elements: air, water, fire, and earth/rock. The Glow Part 2 is fire. It was a very emotional time. I was 22 years old. The themes on the album are solitude, self-sufficiency, keeping one's personal fire going inside the chest despite difficult cold forces outside the self. And it says that he wrote that on March 20th, 2008.
Okay, so there's actually lots of interesting things in
Yes.
that little
Yeah. Feel
paragraph
free
there.
to dissect
Um,
any of that.
yeah, so firstly, how old did he say he was? I didn't catch that.
22.
22. Okay, first of all, fuck that. Um,
I
uh,
think that's the age I was when I was. No, I was 21 when I was getting into the record, but still.
yeah, but still, come on. And
Yeah.
then the other thing is, I think it's interesting that he said that there wasn't actually that much collaboration on the album apart from that one song, and despite the kind of long list of features that got put on it. Because when I was listening to this earlier today, really in depth, I thought that I was hearing lots of sort of collaboration. Um, so that is interesting that this also appears to be just mainly like a Phil-centric project.
Yeah. So I remember hearing him say, I can't remember where I heard this, but he said basically he did You'll Be in the Air as like a live band recording with a bunch of people.
Huh.
And then otherwise, like the other tracks, like he had like a couple of his usual guest vocals appear in kind of limited ways, but it was otherwise almost completely him.
Okay, that's interesting because yeah, I know Mira is on a couple places again. She sings on Map, and I Want to Be
Yes.
Cold, like at the very end.
Yeah.
Um, but other than that, yeah, there's definitely less sort of yeah, as far as like just the vocal performances go, it is definitely more Phil, just
Yeah.
Phil, than it was How We Stayed in the Water.
And who boy, his performances on this record.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I think how we're gonna start this by both of us sharing our most what was the word you used?
Our starkest memory of the Glow
Yeah,
Part
our
2.
starkest memory of the
Of
Glow Part
listening
2,
to it, I guess.
of listening to it. All right. I guess I'll start because I feel like I don't have like one particular like standout moment. There are lots of times I listen to this,
Yeah.
while being distressed, that I think were kind of formative and important and helped me to realize it was my favorite album. But I just have this one kind of random memory of I used to live in a very kind of geographically beautiful area with lots of like rivers and bluffs and like lots of woodlands and stuff to walk around with. So I'd
Yeah.
often listen to this album walking around in the woods. And again, this album is sort of very evocative of a kind of naturalistic setting. Obviously, nature gets brought up a lot. And I remember I was just walking through the woods one day in like the middle of January or something like that. So everything was just dead and snow on the ground. And I got through the first trying to think here, like 7 songs without an issue, and then for some reason, the first something number one, which is nothing but just like cellos, just made me like break down crying. It was like that song with no lyrics and just like 2 instruments that for some reason got to me first.
Yeah. That's I don't know that God, what did you say? You got through the first 5 songs without a problem.
Yeah, which
That's
I don't
just
know
a
how I
that's
did it,
just a
but
really funny fitting way or thing to say about this album.
because any
Um
one of them could get you at any time. You never
yeah.
know.
Oh yeah. It's sneaky.
It
Um
is.
yeah, I thought I didn't love the kind of middle, like towards the end section of this record for a little while, not too long, until it was like suddenly kind of the heart of the album and the only thing I could listen to for about a month.
Right, right.
um anyway, so this record kind of came to me a couple years ago during what felt like a couple, I guess it was a few now. Anyway, a few years ago during what felt like a really kind of apocalyptic time in my life where I don't know, it felt like all my kind of like relationships were ending. I was in college and basically all of my friends graduated at once, and I was going through this really like tumultuous time in my relationship, and I really don't know how I would have managed without its like company and I guess guidance.
Hmm.
Just kind of Phil did this emotional legwork for me. And it like helped me make a sense of a lot of what I was feeling at the time, and like listening to The Moon and My Roots Are Strong and Deep was kind of the only way I could find some comfort. Anyway, that being said, my starkest memory of this album is lying on the couch at work, no one else there, just so stuck and feeling like I had no tether to any past or recent version of myself, and playing I Want Wind to Blow over and over and over again before just letting the rest of the album
Yeah,
play.
yeah. I I get it. Um, yeah, I mean, like we kind of mentioned, I can't remember if we mentioned this while recording or not, but I feel like it's an album that kind of attaches itself to you in like very personal ways.
Yeah.
And I feel like everyone I've talked to who is a big fan of this album, which is I feel like most people who've kind of given it a real fair shot, have some sort of memory or
Yeah.
some sort of like stark story like this where It's just kind of been like a guiding light, I feel like.
Yeah. I think it's just kind of like this record like deals with I mean, I don't want to speculate about his personal life, but it deals with beyond what he's just outright said, I guess.
Hmm.
It kind of it deals with some like things that just happen to people, kind of happens to everyone in some way or another, or some kind of like adjacent thing, but it's one of I don't know, it deals with kind of a simple like universal kind of personal tragedy that isn't like as extreme as death, but you know, it's everyone goes through like a really bad breakup or kind of the like death of an old version of yourself, and I feel like that's what this album deals in primarily,
Yeah.
and that's kind of, you know, that those are things that are just a part of life. But when you're kind of young and going through them for the first time, it truly feels apocalyptic, and it hurts, and it hurts so bad, and this album cuts to the core of that.
Yeah. So, do you think this would be a good time to sort of dive into some of the particulars here? Um,
Sure.
um, I mean, specifically, we might as well start with "I Want Wind to Blow," just because, um,
The first
it's the
song of the
first
album.
song. It's you could say it's like the most quote unquote iconic song from the album. I feel like it's the most. Not that any of these songs are super like recognizable to the general public, but I feel like in the
Yeah.
circles of people who would know this album, this is the song that most people probably know. Um, and to me, I think this is sort of like the perfect introduction to this album. It kind of is a micro version of just kind of many of the things that he will go on to explore over the course of this album, both
Yeah.
like lyrics and in how it sounds. For one of the greatest riffs of all time, easily, in my opinion. Just a little like twang, twang, twang. It's just so simple, but
It's
it.
so the way he plays it is just imbues so much like kind of power into that like really simple thing, and kind of like the meandering like I think he I just listened to the Song Exploder episode for this song. I
Yeah,
think he said they're G notes, but just
yeah.
the meandering G notes underneath the main riff. It's just all it comes together, and it I don't know, but it comes together kind of like awkwardly, I guess, but it's perfect, and it's how it should be, and
Hmm.
it carries so much emotional weight to it.
Yeah. Like you
It's
kind of
not
just said.
the way he plays this song is unlike any other guitar playing I've ever heard.
Yeah, and that kind of extends to the album at large. It's sort of disheveled and it's kind of cluttered. It simultaneously feels very arranged, but also like random and unplanned at the same time. And I feel like that kind of disorientation sort of adds to the character of the album as a whole.
It's kind
Um,
of like meaningful chaos, I guess.
yeah,
Like meaningful planned chaos.
exactly. You mentioned the Song Exploder podcast, which I actually also listened to today, and there's some crazy, crazy stuff that you sort of get a glimpse into the like mind of Phil Elverum when he's recording an album or when he's in sort of production mode. Like you mentioned, he'd have like the low G strings in one ear and then like the rest of the guitar in the other ear.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite things he mentioned was placing a microphone 50 feet away from a piano and slamming the notes as hard as he can to make it like resonate in the room and make it sound huge and large.
uh,
Um,
Something he said that like just kind of relating to this that really made sense to me is that he got into music not because he wanted to write songs, but just because he enjoyed recording sounds
exactly, yeah,
and experimenting with that.
and that is very, very evident in some of the early albums that we talked about. And I feel like this is kind of the perfect fusion of that sensibility mixed together with like actual genuine songwriting talent, and they kind of,
Yeah.
for the first time, I would say, like, kind of meshed together in a really, really wonderful way. What else is in here? Another cool thing he does in this song that he will go on to do for the rest of the album is kind of, and what he does throughout all his music is using weather and nature to like describe feelings. It's very typical like Phil Elverum thing to do. Um, so yeah, you got like the thunderclouds broke up is like the first line of the song, and
Yeah.
he put in a little funny tidbit about that in the Song Exploder podcast, where like the Thunderclouds was the name of an old Beach Boys cover band he was in, and so
You
the band
can
broke up.
you can hear a snippet of him singing Good Vibrations. I think
Yeah.
it was on Don't Wake Me Up. Like just out of the blue, it pops in, then it leaves.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's probably what that is, like the Thunderclouds band he was in, and so the Thunderclouds broke up
Yeah.
is like very literal, and then also like a metaphor for emotion.
Those opening lines just kind of the writing on the song, like the kind of weather concepts and stuff, there it's just also like visceral and massive that it's hard to really like kind of speak to what makes them so effective and meaningful, I guess. But I don't know. To me, like I interpret this song as this kind of punishing stillness after an intense and tumultuous time, like a feeling that you almost had more during that time, and that the quiet that comes afterwards hurts more than what caused it.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Um, I guess just to kind of like finish out this song so we can try to talk about another one, is I think I said last week that The Pull has the greatest drop of all time. I'd actually like to update that. And I'd actually like to assert that I Want Wind to Blow, in fact, has the greatest drop of all time.
I
Um,
actually I also had a note on this that I was kind of ignoring because I just started it by saying I Want Wind to Blow is probably my favorite song of the aughts, which is true. But the clip drums at the end are so just powerful and make for
mhm.
a perfect transition to the kind of explosive, brutal instrumentation that opens up the title track.
It is, yeah. The reason that I feel like it's such a visceral, I keep calling it drop. I feel like there's a better word to describe what it is, but where it goes from soft to loud, it's like the whole song kind of has like this rhythm to it or like a sort of pulse to it, and it's just like Phil actually described it in that thing I was listening to today, where at a certain point like tension is just building up and it just keeps building up, and then at some point it kind of has to release, and then that's what it does into this just like really loud overblown clipping drums and like
Yeah.
11 out of 10 guitars. um,
The clip drums are this perfect example of something that's like that in any other context would be considered bad or like would kind of be like a no-no in recording music. Like you don't want your drums to clip, but
yeah.
in general, this album takes all sorts of things that would normally be considered bad, like off time playing, muddied mixing, clipped drums, hard and fast and almost non existent transitions, and it makes them like a fundamental and crucial part of the emotional landscape. And in fact,
Yeah.
I don't think these songs would be as effective and moving as they are without this sense that they could just fall apart or explode at any time.
Absolutely. This album throws so many songwriting conventions and production conventions just like out the window. And
Yeah.
that kind of like attitude towards making music is like a really big part of the character to this album, I think, and like part of the reason why it's so unique and kind of like instantly recognizable.
Yeah. I
Um,
one so I when we were when I was prepping for the It Was Hot podcast, I accidentally listened to It Was Hot and the Glow Part 2 like one after the next. It just because I had loaded them into my CD player without
right.
like thinking that I was going to be making that you know, I don't know, jump, I guess. And it was kind of startling how much he ups the ante on this
Yeah.
record, and how much of a giant leap forward it is. As much as I do really like It Was Hot, like,
Yeah, this is sort of like a fully realized version of that. Like all of that ambition and sort of like idiosyncrasies of his music really get put on full complete display here.
yeah.
There's another fun thing. I'll just mention one more thing from this podcast to keep going on about. He just says so much cool stuff in it. But he at the end of I Want Wind to Blow, apparently wanted to was trying to make the guitar sound like water. Um,
Oh yeah.
so he like had I can't remember exactly how he described it, and I don't really understand some of this like, terminology he uses, but he effectively like has two separate microphones going. One's on the strings of the guitar and one's on the amp of the guitar, and then he puts two different delay rates on them, so it like kind of has this waves crashing over itself kind of sound with the guitar, and that's playing on top of lyrics about like what's the last line of the song, like there's no ships on my sea or whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of water centric lyrics basically, and the production is matching that in a sonic way somehow.
Yeah. Oh, another thing he said, you should probably just go and listen to the Song Exploder podcast, folks.
Yeah, yep, 100%.
Anyway, another thing he said that I thought was really kind of illuminating was he described these different, like, it always feels like they should or would be motifs, but they aren't. But he describes these, like, kind of instrumental moments on this song where, like, this like accordion part comes in and then it just goes away, and he says that he wanted to have all these kind of different characters just dropping in and then going away, and it those moments really build the kind of, like, chaos and tension of the instrumental breakdown at the end, and just, throughout the song, and they give it so much more kind of, for lack of a better word, character.
Yeah.
Like, it gives it so much more life. Anyway, this is a fantastic song, and there are probably endless things to say about that we can't really just do in one sitting.
Yeah, I feel like we've probably wrung the towel out on I Want Wind to Blow.
For
Um,
now.
for now, I'm sure we'll reference it many times. But
Yeah.
you can't really talk about I Want Wind to Blow without then directly mentioning the title track here, the Glow Part Two.
It just flows straight into it. And in
Yep,
general, what I realized when prepping for this podcast is this whole album is kind of just a medley.
it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like if I had never heard this album before and I just listened to it straight through, I don't think I'd be too out of line thinking that it is one song with just a really distinct front and second half.
Yeah.
That's not to say they sound the same at all, but just the transition itself is so seamless and so kind of immediate that it's sort of hard for me to listen to I Want Wind to Blow without then immediately listening to the Glow Part 2 afterwards. I feel like I'm like missing something, if I
Yeah.
don't kind of do both at once.
I think it's hard, like, I don't know. I just get sucked into so much of a trance listening to I Want Wind to Blow that I would never be able to stop myself.
Right, yeah,
That's
no, that's
probably
fair.
how I've started many listens of the Glow Part 2. Like, I wanted to listen to I Want Wind to Blow, and then just the whole album happened.
Yeah, and then 45 minutes later, you're like, wait a
Yeah.
minute. Um, yeah, a lot of well, I mean, just this song is also has so many kind of incredible things happening. Again, it starts out with these like really jarring, loud electric guitars, and then these really super visceral and emotional, like loud drumming, which we kind of mentioned last week. How good of a drummer Phil is. I think this is maybe my favorite song of his as far as the drums go. The drums on this song are just complete like madness.
Yeah. I don't know. Every aspect of the title track is just kind of insane. Like the acoustic guitars that come in that kind of formally start the like song part of the song are
Yep.
they're genuinely harsh and grating in a way that we just absolutely do not associate with acoustic guitars. Like they rip and claw at you while everything else just explodes in your face in this kind of, early emotional climax of the album.
Yeah, right. This is kind of like the emotional climax in a way, despite being the second song. I mean,
Yeah.
um, so you mentioned last week when we were talking about It Was Hot and the Glow Part One that this album is sort of, I think you said it rails against the themes from the Glow Part One, the song.
Yeah,
And
like this song especially is kind of just like a violent, raging answer to the Glow. Every line parallels or reprises a line from the Glow, but it's all just fucked up and twisted and hurt and maimed.
yeah, it's just really like the lyrics are just kind of really upsetting. I've one line that's always like really struck me is "My blood flows harshly," because it's like, the fuck does that mean? Like, but it's just so
It's
evocative
yeah,
and just unpleasant to think about.
you just kind of understand too. You're just like, damn, it
Yeah,
do
just
be like that.
yeah, just like existing sucks. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's super fitting how punishing it is to just sing this song. He holds notes for like superhuman length of time. And
yeah.
it's all just so kind of intensely felt the way he sings it, and he does things with his voice that just strike you as like at once being kind of unnatural and just like guttural animal sounds.
Yeah, and another thing you kind of alluded to this that there's not really a set structure to this song. I Want Wind to Blow, you can argue, has like a verse and a chorus, or at least like some semblance
Yeah,
of
there's
like
it's got
repetition.
more structure to it.
Yeah, whereas this song, it's like technically it's like just two verses, but really it's kind of like you said, it's like a medley in itself of different musical ideas that like flow into one another. Because you got like the really loud guitar part, and then you have the part where it's really stripped down and he's just singing really long notes. And then there's like that little kind of like acoustic outro ditty. And it's basically like just so many different ideas woven together to make up this one song. And then all his songs are kind of like those ideas woven together to make this whole album. So it just kind of becomes this like mosaic of all these just crazy ideas
It's
that
a collage.
it really is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Also, just to step back a little bit. The outro isn't, it's not acoustic, but it is like, because it's so kind of so much less like distorted, it almost feels that way.
Right. No, you're
Like
right.
in
There's like drums on
comparison to
it.
the intro and like it I don't know, the song just rages in and then it glides out. But it's almost,
Exactly.
I don't know, because of the way the I don't know, like what you go through listening to the words, the outro almost hurts more than the harsh, intense intro.
Yeah, it's just really beautiful. That's the thing that he's really able to do in this album that is kind of so surprising to me is even the moments where he's not singing or there's no lyrics, like just those little instrumental motifs that like they never get repeated. He'll only like play them once on one song, but they're always so like beautiful and emotive in and of themselves somehow.
Yeah. There is a lot of also like weaving on this record too, like so many kind of ideas will pop up later, or like
Yeah.
see some kind of conclusion later on the album. Or like there's a foghorn on this record
Yes.
that's in like half the songs.
Yep.
Mm. That I made the connection only because we did our podcast on It Was Hot, that is probably a subtle nod to kind of the specter of the watery themes and romance from that album.
I actually have a quote from Phil specifically about this foghorn
Oh,
that I was waiting to bring up at some point
exciting.
because yeah, you're right. This foghorn, despite the album kind of shifting drastically between sounds and sort of being like I guess what was the word he said like it's like many different ideas woven together. This is one of the kind of tethers that holds it together in a weird way. Um, but anyway, here's the quote. He says, the whole album has this foghorn sound over the top of it. I was watching Twin Peaks, and I noticed that every time there was a scene at Pete and Catherine and Josie's house, very subtly there would be this kind of loud or this kind of low foghorn in the background every 30 or 45 seconds. It was so subtle, but it was perfect. It gave you the idea that they were near the water. I decided that the album would be in that setting too because it reminded me very much of Anacortes, which is where I live now and where I'm from. I wanted to really nail it down in that setting. I tried to record the foghorn here in Anacortes. I got these extension cords and chained them all together, and I got a really fancy mic I borrowed from the studio, but it didn't work out. It just wasn't foggy, so I ended up synthesizing the sound with a tape loop with just one note played on the bass, slowed down a lot with a lot of reverb and tape hiss.
That's cool.
So that's the enigmatic foghorn that is sort of
Yeah.
ever present on this album.
I have noticed many times that it clearly evocates a foghorn. Like you know it's a foghorn, but that is not what foghorns sound like.
Right? And it's
Yeah.
not even like objectively the sound is not a foghorn. Like he
Yeah.
tried to get a real foghorn and it like didn't sound right. So he made a fake foghorn that sounds more like a foghorn.
Yeah.
Um but you're right, yeah. So that kind of comes back, that ties the album together. There are other sort of motifs that come back as well. One connection that I thought was interesting was between Headless Horseman and I Am Bored. Kind of, I feel like those two songs are tied together
Right.
in an interesting
Yeah.
way. Because I'm trying to think what the lyric is.
Oh, what a loss
Yeah,
is
oh, what a loss.
yeah.
There's a line about his head being torn off and thrown at you, and I Am Bored, like Headless Horseman.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is an interesting point as well. That it is tied together in ways that aren't necessarily 100% immediate, or that you would kind of think are normal things to tie an album together with.
Do you want to talk about I Am Bored for a second? Because what the
Sure.
fuck?
Yeah. It's funny because really interesting song that no one ever really talks about in my experience. It's not really brought up with the likes of some of these other sort of staple The Glow Part 2 tracks.
Right.
But yeah, I'm Bored is a wonderful song.
I wrote in my notes that that I want to be cold through I felt my size, which includes I Am Bored. Is like kind of an all-timer 3-song stretch that gets unfairly overshadowed by the all-timer 3-song stretch that opens the album.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And I think
Yeah,
it's like I think people tend to like kind of pick up on these songs a little bit less unless they're really sitting with the album, just because like there's so much less songs than those first 3 tracks are. Like
yep. The
I don't
song
know.
lengths also shortened kind
They're
of
short.
considerably.
It really is a medley, and they all kind of feel like the same thing. I remember when I was first getting into the album, I showed it to my friend Ryan. They said like it starts out great, and then the rest of it is just all noise, but I like it though.
Yeah,
Which
that's
it can kind of feel like that, like when before you kind of are more intimate with the songs, where everything is just like after those first like 5 very concrete songs. It's like it's just kind of this ocean of sound. Um,
I remember when I was first getting into kind of the deeper cuts on this album, I noticed that there was always at least one thing on every single song that I thought was really interesting. Like a lot of songs when they're 20 tracks and they're kind of like from a distance it seems almost like it's haphazardly thrown together, but there's always at least one moment on every song where it's like, wait, this is like really kind of cool. And that's
yeah.
kind of how I got into it at large. I Am Bored, like the one you mentioned. I don't know if that one was like anything really specific and concrete, but I just remember really liking the contrast of it's like kind of upbeat and it's kind of like catchy, especially compared to like some of the really noisy songs before it. But then the lyrics are just like really sinister.
Meanest lyrics on the album.
Yeah, it's like a really strange contrast because it's almost like, you can like sing along with it, but then the lyrics are just like really violent and like dark.
Violence kind of a weird word, but I know what you mean.
I mean,
the song itself is a little violent in the way that it's like it's all kind of like suspended motion, like the descending piano riff that just kind of like punches up and down. And it always feels like it's kind of like hurtling towards something, but just in this weird vacuum where it never gets there. And yeah, like in the song, he's just kind of dealing with like this significant other presumably caused him like so much pain, and now he's just like completely bored hanging out with them. Like it just doesn't mean anything anymore, and it's like it's such a kind of like bitter pill, but I don't know, it's
and that contrast is like kind of huge because there's like a line like, "You tore a hole so deep, my leak poured out torrentially." Like that's a really kind of like visceral image in my head, just like blood pouring out like torrentially, but like now he's bored, or like getting your head torn off.
My bloody flow is slowed so I can be bored near you. Oh, what a loss. And he says that with just like so little empathy.
Yeah. No, exactly. I feel like we mentioned briefly a couple minutes ago that people are sort of quick to claim that the first three songs on this album are like where the real meat is, and there's like this sort of prevailing opinion that like those are the three best songs on the album, and that like you can take or leave the rest of it depending on like kind of where your tastes lie. But which obviously I don't agree with that sentiment. However, I do agree with the sentiment.
We're doing this podcast. We're doing this whole damn series.
yeah, exactly. Well, right, yeah. I do agree with the sentiment inside that sentiment, though, that basically says The Moon is the greatest song ever written, which is something I can absolutely put my weight behind, and I can co-sign that 100% of the time.
The moon is an ocean to float through.
Exactly.
The first time I heard the synth that just drones through the whole thing, and like the siren like horn and then the descending horn riff, I was changed forever. I heard that song before listening to the album in full because I was listening to former podcast member Arthy's radio show, and they played it, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. I like this. Who is this?
Right.
Because I had tried to listen to this album before, but I did not make it through to the end of the title track because it was too ouchy.
Not ready yet.
Yeah, I wasn't ready yet.
I mean, yeah, and you have to understand that, like, when people say, oh, the first three songs on the Glow Part 2 is the greatest stretch on any album ever, they're not lying or being hyperbolic or making a meme. They are simply stating an objective fact as real as the laws of physics that hold our reality together. They're just failing to acknowledge that it's actually the greatest 20-song stretch. Yeah. They're just capping it at 3 for some kind of arbitrary reason that I don't fully understand.
See, that's the galaxy brain. That's the like all the way in, you know, the final stage of listening to the Glow Part 2 take.
Exactly.
Which is also that the foghorn is the most beautiful thing you've ever heard.
Every like progression of brain is just like a higher number of tracks.
Yeah.
Like normal brain is 3, and then like super brain is like 5, and then galaxy brain. Yeah. Exactly. But But I mean, there's so much to love about the moon. Like you mentioned, the guitar riff. It's basically just like four different versions of it, like playing over and over itself. Um, and then yeah, just like the wall of noise. It's cool how I feel like Phil's voice in this song is mixed really, really low. It's kind of mixed low a lot in a lot of his songs.
Yeah.
But this song in particular, it's mixed like super low to the point where it sort of blends in with all the rest of the instrumentation.
Yeah. The cacophony is almost more important than what he's saying, even though the lyrics are like so heavy and significant and like moving.
And that's like
meaningful.
the best kind of like piece of irony to me is that the lyrics to the moon are like so impactful, and it's the one song where you really can't hear them or understand them unless you're like purposely going out of your way to look it up.
Or you've just listened to it 10 times in a row because you can't listen to anything else.
Yeah. And speaking of the lyrics, I guess I love the idea of this song where it's just kind of, Phil, it seems, has just kind of gotten out of a relationship that ended painfully and is now sort of like revisiting all the important places from that relationship by himself in order to find closure, which is like probably not the best move in this scenario.
No,
but it like makes for some really affecting lyrics.
Yeah, it's kind of relatable.
Yeah.
I'm looking for this specific couplet where he says at the end of it, silently we both felt powerful. I don't know, just the like the sentiment of that is such a kind of clear analog for the feeling of like a first kind of mature adult love, or like like the kind of empowerment you get, like actually propping each other up and not just kind of having this like explosive infatuation, but having like something more kind of concrete and genuinely enriching. And it's also just super punishing to hear it within the context of like what he's singing about and what he's doing in the song.
Right. It's also interesting that I think this song has also more than one. There's Moon sequel. I want to say there's maybe even like a third part of the Moon where it's like this is one of those songs that sort of is almost like a narrative that will continue to be built on throughout his discography.
Lots of children.
Yes, this is the Papa Moon.
Fucking Soria Moria, which is one of his absolute best songs.
Yes, I wrote that down. I was debating whether or not to mention that, but yeah, this song does get kind of very briefly repurposed onto A Crow Looked at Me.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, whew.
Yeah, that's one of the most, well, like that's really hard to say.
Yeah. Like, again, crossovers like that are not at all uncommon in Phil's discography, but I feel like those two specific songs getting crossed over, it kind of enters a new, like echelon of painful.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, I guess what I was trying to say is like, when I was first kind of digging into A Crow Looked at Me, like, because of my experience with the Glow Part 2, and I actually kind of got into them concurrently a little bit. Okay. That's just when, A Crow Looked at Me had come out a few months earlier, and I was just getting into his discography in general. And I don't know, because of my then experiences with the Glow Part 2, it was just, like, so kind of striking, I guess. But, obviously A Crow Looked at Me is a really heavy and complicated and very striking album, and I don't really want to say superlatives about it.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about A Crow Looked at Me
somehow at some point.
Yes.
So yeah, I feel like the thing about this album is we could probably just jump anywhere on the track list and just have a bunch of stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
Just like throw a dart at the track list here, and we can talk about that one.
Before we move on from the Moon, though, Can
Okay.
we talk about the repetitive ramshackle strumming that opens and closes the track? It's just I
Yeah.
don't know. I guess mostly just what I want to say is that the having that as the opening and letting it go as long as it goes is such a kind of necessary introduction to the song. I don't know, it really puts you in whatever place you need to be to hear it right and to really like float into the moon, I guess.
I agree. And I don't think it would be as impactful if it just started with a sort of wall of noise that it goes into. I like that kind of build up with the acoustic guitars again, which is like several of them playing the same riff kind of on
Yeah.
top of each other, at least what it sounds like, and then
Yeah.
going into that wall of noise. It adds like that really and like kind of a needed contrast.
But just yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This song is so good. It's so like it's such a perfect portrait of like the disorienting
Yeah.
aftermath of watching like uh, an early love crumble and kind of dealing with this harsh alien new reality and just completely disconnected from the one before. It's very starkly alone in a discography of songs about being alone.
Yeah. I'm hesitant to call it my favorite song on the album. But if I really, really had to, like I feel like most of the time I'd probably pick the moon.
Yeah, I generally wouldn't say that my favorite song on the album is The Moon, but I would be wrong to to do that.
You would be.
I think on any given day, I might say I want wind to blow, The Glow Part 2, The Moon, My Roots Are Strong and Deep, or I Am Bored.
Of all those songs that you just listed, there's only one that we have yet to mention. So I feel like why not just dive into My Roots Are
Sure,
Strong and Deep?
sure. Um
Because yeah, I mean, to me, My Roots Are Strong and Deep. This is the first like really short song on the album, or like snippet, I guess you could say. And he's done it before, but on this album there are like more of them, and I feel like in general these sort of like quote unquote like snippets. I don't want like calling them that, but I feel like they're like better in general. Um, and yeah, I don't know what he did to make the piano sound like how it sounds on this song, but it's just like beautiful.
it's unlike any piano I've heard, and I'm going to say basically that phrase a lot
Right?
over the next, you know, 10 to 30 hours, however long this podcast takes.
Somewhere in between there. Yeah, it's like he took an organ and then like turned the reverb all the way up. But that still doesn't kind of do it justice. It's just like so pronounced and like dreamlike. It sounds
Yeah,
like a kind of weird alien lullaby that's also
yeah,
really intense.
and
Um,
it's like every like chord or note is just like a punch.
right,
Like
yeah.
it feels like he was just punching it.
Um,
It's all played so heavily, which again normally would not be like a desirable thing in piano playing to just do like just that. It would be like a sign of a heavy hand, but it's perfect here. It's defining. It's has emotional resonance. Um, and I don't know, when I got into this album, this song was like kind of a mantra for me because it I don't know, it helped me feel kind of strong, I guess, but also okay about my lack of influence over um different events in my life, I guess.
yeah, that
Um
that I think what you just said is like a kind of sort of prominent theme throughout these tracks.
Yeah, just kind of feeling a strong grasp on yourself, but simultaneously feeling just absolutely dwarfed by someone else's influence,
Yeah,
and
and in this
just
song,
like you could be completely obliterated by them at any second if you haven't already and just hadn't noticed yet.
and that's the cool thing about this song in particular. He's kind of like singing from the perspective as of a tree, like in the ground.
Yeah.
He's like trying to reach out, but he can't because his roots are in the ground. Just like a really cool, again, using kind of these naturalistic images to convey something like really deeply emotional.
Yeah, absolutely. He said on the Song Exploder podcast that was like he was like that was kind of my thing back then, using like nature and the weather to describe my emotions, and then he relented and he was like, I guess you could say that about what I'm doing now too.
That is, yeah, I thought that was funny as well.
Yeah.
I think that episode came out around the time he was like promoting Sana, and we'll get to Sana. Great album, but
Yeah.
that's again something that is very sort of prevalent throughout his discography.
The kind of the instrumental that comes after My Roots Are Strong and Deep is so necessary.
Yeah, I feel like now would be a good time to kind of like just go over some of these instrumentals, because there are four instrumentals on this album. There's instrumental 1 and 2. They are kind of ostensibly named that. There's not actually a 1 and 2 after them. There's just two instrumentals, and then there's two songs that are just called something in parentheses.
I noticed today. So on streaming services and stuff, those are separated. The two somethings. It on Apple Music it says something and then something brackets 1, but
Okay.
but on my CD copy and my vinyl copy, it's just listed as one something.
Oh, really?
Which, and they do flow into each other. But
Okay.
that I don't know. I wonder what's up with that.
Yeah, I've always seen them labeled as two separate songs. That is interesting that they're, because yeah, they very well could be considered one song. I guess they're right next to each other on the track list, so they do sort of flow in together. I think they sound very different, so
Yeah.
I can understand break them apart that way. Again, Something One is the song I mentioned earlier, the instrumental song that made me cry for some reason. This is maybe my. I really truly love all the instrumentals on this album. Something One is maybe my favorite, just because the like really low cello sounds or something just really eerie and haunting to me, and can't really place it, but
Yeah. The more intimate you get with this album, the more these instrumental segments resonate. And the more at least for me that they begin to like kind of become emblematic of the like emotional flavor of the album, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know, like every piece of the Glow Part 2 is just as significant as the last, and I don't think of the album as really having superior segments, even though some songs like the first three stand alone better than other parts of the record. But you know, I guess what I'm trying to illustrate is the somethings and the instrumentals are just as significant and important to me as the moon.
yeah, that's a really good way to put it. There are just two things that I want to say about these instrumentals. Number one is this something two, or the second something. I guess for a while I probably would have pegged it as like the song that interests me the least on the album, but I've like first it's just kind of this distorted noise. But I've really come around to it anyway, because it sounds like weird kind of malintentioned alien machinery coming to like take over the earth, and it's just like a really weird contrast to me, or not a weird contrast, it's just like a noticeable contrast to the very naturalistic feelings of the rest of this album, where this song is very cold and kind of non-human in a way that is sort of opposite what comes before and after it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's really really eerie and just weird to listen to. So, eerie.
yeah,
A.
agreed. And then the other one is the second instrumental, which comes right in between I Felt My Size and I Felt My Shape. I pretty much never listen to these three songs separately. Like when I do, I always listen to I Felt My Size into instrumental into I Felt Your Shape.
Yeah.
But I feel like instrumental 2 is just so beautiful for some reason. It's just like a little kind of acoustic song, but then these kind of really loud and droning electric guitars come in at the end, and there's this really beautiful like vocal harmony Phil does. There's no lyrics, but his voice is in it.
Yeah.
And I always kind of I just love the chord progression a lot for some reason. I've always kind of wished that it was like a full and complete song, like that it somehow got like fleshed out, like with lyrics and stuff. That it would have been really awesome. But I'm not going to complain
Maybe it did
about
at
it.
some point, but it just wasn't right.
It's great as it is.
Yeah.
And there's a reason it's like my favorite instrumental track. So I don't know.
Yeah. I I don't know. It struck me as interesting that you said that you won't listen to uh I felt my size or I felt your shape separately because I felt your shape is probably the only song that I tend to listen to on its own and with some regularity.
That's
Um,
fair. It can stand alone. I'd for sure understand that. I guess
it's
my
it's kind of the most straightforward song here.
it is. I would
Um,
say that as well.
it's pretty structured and it's just a beautiful acoustic ballad, I guess. It's super. It's one of the most tender moments in Phil's entire discography.
It
Um,
is. I think one of the first songs that clicked for me on this album for sure was this song. Because like you said, it is probably the most like straightforward quote unquote indie folk song that's on this quote unquote indie folk album. Um, there's a lot of really cool kind of like imagery throughout it that I like. I specifically like the lines like "I felt your fall, your winter snow, and your gusty blow and your lava flow." I don't know why I think it's so cool.
yeah.
Um, there's actually another Phil quote I found about this song. I was just kind of like finding random Phil Elverum quotes about the Glow Part 2 today, but he said, "I felt your shape is basically about hugging. The difference between hugging someone and grabbing them and squeezing them and not letting go, or hugging them in a lighter way where you're feeling their shape, not in a desperate grabbing way, but in a way that's sensitive or something."
Right. Yeah. It's a really kind of beautiful and touching moment on such a like harsh and tumultuous album, and in a kind of fitting way for the record is that he follows the most tender moment with the like harshest, heaviest, most intense song on the
Yeah,
record. Or I don't even know if I want to say intense because I feel like the most intense song is kind of the Glow Part 2. Just the way he sings it is so like, you know, you know how it is.
I know what you mean. Samurai Sword is probably the most abrasive song, I would say.
Yes.
Just in
Yeah.
terms of how it sounds and how it's put together instrumentally, it's easily the loudest and most like kind of overwhelmingly pummeling song on here. It's just like so fucking loud.
I used to. There have been times where I've skipped Samurai Sword, but now it's like it's kind of a release for me. It's kind
Yeah.
of like it's so easy for me to listen to now. Um oh, so there's in the CD booklet after the lyrics, he quotes this long passage that I wanted to read.
Yeah.
Throwing down your sword is also an art of war. If you have attained mastery of swordlessness, you will never be without a sword. The opponent's sword is your sword. This is acting at the vanguard of the moment. Swordlessness doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take the opponent's sword. It also doesn't mean that you make a show of sword snatching for your reputation. It is the swordless art of not getting killed when you have no sword. The basic intention is nothing like deliberately setting out to snatch a sword. It is not a matter of insistently trying to wrest away what is being deliberately kept from your grasp. Not to grasp is also swordlessness. Someone who is intent on not having his sword taken away forgets what he's opposed to and just tries to avoid having his sword taken away, so he can't manage to kill anyone. Swordlessness is not the art of taking another's sword. Its purpose is to use all tools freely. If you are even able to take away another's sword when you are unarmed, and make it your own, then what will not be useful in your hands? That's it.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah,
I
because
know. And I don't totally know like what it means within the context of the album, but it does resonate. It does like I don't know how to put it to words yet, but it does like just kind of it speaks to me, I guess.
yeah, no, I think this is one of the songs that I really kind of appreciated the lyrics to. And again, these are lyrics that you'll have to look up if you want to understand them, because again, they're mixed very, very low in this extremely loud song. But
Yeah.
it's just I probably wouldn't be able to give you an articulate reason why it fits in with that swordlessness quote, but it just kind of like the imagery of Phil, like just badass in the woods, like staring down a polar bear, like with a sword, just like covered in blood.
Yeah.
Like, just, I don't know.
I think
Just real,
there's
again, cool imagery.
there's a sense of him trying to like grab control of the situation and his
Yeah.
feelings about it. And there's kind of a desperation to it a little bit. Also the I don't know, the segment that ends this song is mostly silence and the
Yeah.
foghorn, and it's just such a necessary break after all that chaos. And to me it's just a like I don't know, I feel like if you wanted a perfect little microcosm of what the Glow Part 2 is, you would listen to the tenderness of I Felt Your Shape and then the absolute chaos of the first half of Samurai Sword and
Yeah.
then just the silence and the foghorn of the end of that song.
And you can do the whole thing in like 4 minutes. Um, just to jump back briefly, because I mentioned that I like to listen to I Felt My Size through I Felt Your Shape, um, in sequential order a lot. I don't have like a very particular reason for it, aside from those just being like three of my like really, really favorite songs on the album, and them sort of being tied together with like the I felt blank kind of motif. Um,
Yeah.
but I do want to mention I Felt My Size, because I really, really love this song. Just like a beautiful little sad chord progression, and then it's let me see, the song is only 2 minutes and 24 seconds, but somehow there's like four sections where it's really loud and like four sections where it's really quiet, like in that tiny little like runtime. It'll just be like really sweet and tender, and then it'll be like really wacky and loud, and there's like weird bells and whistles in it, and like then it'll go back to kind of fading out again, and then the distortion will come back. It's just kind of like a really chaotic like whirlwind of a song for only being 2 minutes. Like a lot of different shit happens.
It's one of the
Um,
weirdest songs on the record too, just like in terms of kind of what he does and the different places he goes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it also ties back to what you're saying earlier. Sort of, I guess, realizing how small you are, like just kind of in a really vague and general sense. Like it's him sort of looking down at the world from some unnamed high vantage point,
Yeah.
just kind of like being in awe of his own really small size. But yeah, I mean, at this point, like I kind of said earlier, I feel like we can just throw a dart at a track we haven't talked about yet and get into it, because there's still some places I like feel like I need to hit on for sure.
We didn't really talk a whole lot about Headless Horseman and also Map. I would really like to talk about.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, we mentioned Headless Horseman briefly, in that it sort of is similar to I Am Bored in some ways.
It's kind of like the prequel.
It's right. But Headless Horseman is the fourth track, so I guess one of the things that's really baffling to me when people are like best 3 song stretch is like just the complete disrespect of Headless Horseman. Like unbelievable. Because Headless Horseman is like absolutely the prototypical textbook definition of a banger. Um, I don't know. I love Headless Horseman. It's like so tender and comfy. Um,
After the
really.
like absolute sorry. No. Yeah, I want you to finish what you're saying first.
Okay, no. All I was gonna say is that it has really fucking sad lyrics. So
Yeah. Okay. After the like to build off of that, after the, mess, the relative mess that is the moon, like the clarity of Headless Horseman is so punishing, and the simple lyrics on this song and how they're delivered just kind of cut to the core of the insularity and confusion of just being like unexpectedly separated from your partner and being like kind of unsure about how you feel about them anymore, with like love and resentment and desolation clashing and presenting themselves all at once.
yeah, there's so many like just zingers on this song. Just like one line zingers that just
Fucking
cut to your core.
I when my first go round through the notes for this song, I just wrote all the lyrics, and after each bullet point of a line, I wrote something like "What the fuck?" or "Is this allowed?"
It is not allowed for one. Absolutely not allowed. Completely illegal. Um, and it's like, yeah, I don't even want to like say any lyrics from it because they're really all just kind of that perfect.
And also kind of divorcing them from their context just feels like
Yeah,
wrong. But that being said, "You deserve yourself" and "I miss my closest friend" are just some of the most punishing lines on this album.
yeah, we're just ending with like, it's a precious thing we lost. Just,
Fuck. Ow.
I know. Yeah,
Ouchie. Ouch,
completely,
oof, my
completely
bones.
brutal. Um, Yeah, so I mean, like, that's Headless Horseman. The foghorn is in this song. I feel like you can kind of hear it in some of the quieter songs. Like, a lot of the times it's between tracks or like at the end of a song. Sometimes you can kind of just hear it intermittently, like throughout the recording.
Yeah.
Um, One song I really was excited to mention was The Mansion, because I had kind of like I don't know, when I was listening to it today, for some reason it like hit me really hard in
Okay.
comparison with like how it like, usually does. I don't know. Um, for one, like I think this is the first song on the album where it's like got a really kind of every song before this sounds so different. It's kind of hard to get a really good grasp on like what the general atmosphere is. I think the mansion kind of it starts to pull everything together.
Right.
Um, there's like always little hidden sounds in it. Like there'll be a guitar that like creeps up from behind and then it just like goes away.
This is one
Um,
of the most downright spooky things he's ever done.
yeah, and yeah, like there's instruments kind of wash in and out, and then there's like little like Phil will like talk in the background, but it's like so quiet that you can't really hear what he's saying, like
Yeah.
over him already singing.
Yeah.
And then let me just put on my fucking like undergrad poetry analysis hat.
All
Uh,
right. Come
and talk
on.
about like the mansion itself, which I think is interesting stuff because I mean basically what I'm able to pick up on is Phil wants to like go inside this mansion, which is in the distance, because wherever he is right now, there's nothing. Like that's kind of the lyrics are repeating, like there's no this and there's no that, etc.
Yeah.
But on the inside of the mansion, there's basically is like the glow, and that's like kind of how he's describing it as like this kind of
Okay.
all-encompassing, all-enveloping sense of warmth and comfort. So basically, like the glow is on the inside of this mansion, but he can't get in there because there's no door into the mansion.
Yep.
So Phil can't get inside it and experience the glow like he
Oh
once could,
no.
which is sad.
Yeah. Poor guy.
Poor Phil. He
Our poor
can't get
buddy.
inside the mansion.
Also, I'm looking at the lyrics, totally unrelated. Huge jump, but he didn't write the lyrics in for "I Want to Be Cold" or "I Am Bored." For "I Want to Be Cold," he just wrote "I want wind to blow my clothes off me" and put clothes in quotes, and there's an ellipse at the end of that. And then for "I Am Bored," he just wrote "I am bored enough to not feel anything near you," and then in quotes, "Oh, what a loss." And then "My
Interesting.
pumpkin head was torn and thrown, and back it grew," and that was it.
I'm really curious how anyone found out the lyrics to "I Want to Be Cold" if they weren't in there. Like someone had to have gotten an isolated vocal track or
Well,
something.
let me check the lyrics in the LP notes because I've got those here too.
Oh, perfect.
He does in fact actually give the
Okay,
lyrics in those.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, "I Want to Be Cold," wonderful song. I mean, now that I guess we're just talking about it. I think that "I Want to Be Cold" is probably one of the saddest songs on here. And again, just like kind of like really intensely bleak and like pessimistic.
Yeah.
Uh, again, like read the lyrics. But one thing about
I can't
I want,
deal with feeling this bad.
yeah, right. It's just so blunt. He's like,
Yeah.
everything fucking sucks.
Yeah.
Um, there's one line on the very very tail end of this song that's like sung by Mira, and this is basically just like a clip of a completely different song.
You drew a heart with an arrow shot right through.
Yeah, every time I listen to "I Want to Be Cold," I like want to know what that song is, and if it's an actual Mira
Always sticks
song.
out to me.
Yeah, maybe that's like an actual Mira song somewhere, and I'll have to like dig deeper to find it. But like that's just always been kind of interesting to me. Is like after the just like noise and cacophony of "I Want to Be Cold," there's just like a little Mira snippet that is kind of like doesn't really lead anywhere, and then you kind of just go into "I'm bored."
Yeah.
All right, I mean we're getting there. We're really getting there. There's only a few more songs that we have not talked about yet.
This will probably be the longest one we do.
As it should be.
I mean, I we could maybe go longer for A Crow Looked at Me, but I feel like we won't.
Yeah, that's true. Or one of the
Yeah.
ones where it's like 5 albums.
Oh, that is true. We do have a couple episodes that are like 5 albums.
In terms of just a straight one album discussion, though, this probably will be the long. I mean, there's 20 songs, like, and I
Yeah.
and I and I feel like a really deep need to at least like mention all of them.
Yeah, I did write something down for almost all of them, even
Yeah,
though for like a couple of them, like The Mansion, all I wrote was this is the spookiest thing he has ever done.
which it is.
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned the map, or
Map.
not the map, map,
Yes.
map earlier. Map
Map
is a great
fucking
song.
it's hard to communicate what makes it so compelling. Like as a poem, it's really simple and doesn't give a lot for you to go on. And I don't know. I think it's the vocals, but also kind of the way the song is structured. Like it's just this wall of noise, and then there's a moment, the bridge, where you hit this like hard piano lockstep march,
Yeah,
and for a brief moment it's almost like a relief that you have some like concrete instrumentation, but then I don't know, it's like I guess I don't know, it just kind of marches all over you and then goes away, and instead of relieving any tension, it just kind of ups the ante that much more when the verse comes back, and then when the outro hits, it's just such a release. It's one of the biggest releases on the album for me because Map is it's so kind of stressful to listen to the bulk of the song, and then even though like there are kind of bigger like instrumental breakdowns or whatever on this record, it just like everything just hits so much harder when you get that like wailing piano at the end, or whatever. It's really great. It's very effective.
yeah. I don't think I can really sum it up better than what you just said. That was very like succinct. But the only thing I'll say is what I mentioned earlier, like when I was first listening to this album, and there was kind of like at least one moment on every track that really got me interested. Map, it was definitely that just like weird riff, like right in the middle, that kind of just like really grabbed my attention for some reason. I know you mean
Yeah.
by that.
I think we've covered the bulk of my notes.
Okay.
A lot of the remaining songs I did not say much about. Um,
So There's exactly 4 songs we haven't mentioned, and we can just kind of like pull these off.
Which ones?
For so we haven't mentioned "I'll Not Contain You,"
Oh, the
which
Gleam.
yeah, "I'll Not Contain You," "The Gleam" Part 2, and then "You'll Be in the Air," which actually did mention "You'll Be in the Air" briefly.
And also, My Warm
"My
Blood.
Warm Blood," which I feel like that's a good last song to talk about because it
It's the last song.
it's the last song, and it also kind of ties in neatly into Mount Erie in an
Yeah.
interesting way, which is our next episode, or
Okay.
like one of the next ones.
Okay.
Um,
I'll let you cover that. I would love to talk about I'll Not Continue, and
Please.
honestly, I'm gonna read the lyrics. Well, just a little passage from it. Through lengthy talks, I'll not contain you. Through climbing arms, I'll reach my loft. Through rotting skin, I'll leave my coffin. Through calloused work, I will grow soft. And it's just such a like I don't know, like the a crystal clear portrait of like heavy emotional work, like just a resolve to separate yourself from someone or something that threatens to fundamentally change who you are. Um, and
Yeah.
and and kind of how punishing that work can be. And this song is always one that really kind of strikes me and gets to me when I listen to this album.
Um, Agreed completely. I love. All I'm gonna say is the part where it's like bum bum bum. That part's real good as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, so we have the Gleam Part 2, which we kind of had a pretty decent discussion of the Glow versus the Gleam in our last episode. But again,
Yeah.
the Gleam is sort of like the anti-Glow. Um, one thing in this song is it's got a lot of like steel drums in it. The steel drums that you can kind of like make a melody out of, so it sounds like a
Yeah.
really fucked up reggae song.
Yeah.
Um, it's just like really slow, and it's got like a really kind of like pronounced tempo.
Yeah.
Sounds like I think I said another song sounds like a funeral march last time, but the song also kind of sounds like a funeral march.
Yeah.
And then again, you
The
get the blinded by the gleam, like
the piano that comes on, sorry, that just still on the instrumental. The piano that comes on is like it's so gnarly.
yeah,
For some reason it just conjures images of like the Titanic sitting at the bottom of the ocean for me. Just like old wealth and excess reaching to you from beyond the grave. I don't know, it just spawns that within me.
one interesting thing that I actually just learned today is that the chords or like the notes to the Gleam Part 2 are actually the exact same as they are in Something 1. Like
Huh.
it's just the two notes repeating over and over again. It's the same two notes in both songs. So those are also kind of connected in a
Huh.
way. Yeah. All right. So after we already talked about Map, then we got You'll Be in the Air. Um, So this is the one that actually we kind of mentioned last time, or like 2 episodes ago, where the motif is actually pulled from "Don't Wake Me Up," so it kind of gets its own kind of revamping in this album. Um, this is apparently the one that was the most collaborative, or the one you mentioned that they did in sort of like a live context.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, and I can kind of hear that, like the end of the song where Phil is kind of like yelping. It definitely sounds more like it was done in one take, I guess, if that makes sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
or at least
I
done like live.
This is a
Oh,
very beautiful song, and I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know, it just occupies this very specific space. Can I read one line from it?
of course.
Um, I'll look pinkly out your window in the fog.
Yeah. What does that mean?
It's I don't
To
know, but
look pinkly.
it's real beautiful.
It really is. Also, it's got like these nice guitar like arpeggios, which is I don't know. He doesn't do that very often, so it's fun to see.
Yeah.
Um, it's also like really catchy. Like probably maybe one of the catchiest hooks on here. Just like so immediate.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's one of the songiest songs.
yeah. No, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Yeah. So I think we did a good job, kind of like
Can
rapid fire
I
there. moment. Yes.
Can I say that we didn't want to do this album as like a this podcast as like a track by track, but it's we just we had to talk about every single one of them.
Yeah, like I think like for Don't Wake Me Up, like I don't think we necessarily mentioned every song by name. Like for this one I specifically did want to at least mention every song by name because I feel like some of them are not like talked about ever really and they
Yeah,
need attention.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, and I think it's better than just kind of going track 1, track 2, track 3 or whatever.
yeah.
But so the last song here, My Warm
My
Blood.
Warm Blood.
So technically 9 minutes and 30 seconds, but there's only a couple of minutes of like actual song, like with guitar and singing and whatever.
It
And
still
then
it occupies so much, like it feels so grand. It feels
it
big.
does.
It
Yeah,
it comes it's so propulsive right out the gate. Like even after Samurai Sword, it's just like striking and it just feels like determined to outrun or escape whatever this mess was.
yeah, and it's like also just ends on sort of a really bleak note. Like I don't really know exactly how to. You can basically interpret it as him like dying, like in the woods or something. Like he's
Yeah.
alone and like insects are flying around him. Like they know that his blood is like warm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just kind of again a pretty bleak outro to this album that is then followed by essentially like 8.5 minutes of kind of ambience. There's not really, it's not silence, but there's no music happening. You'll have the foghorn goes
Yeah.
off a bunch. The riff from I Want Wind to Blow kind of will come in
Pops
and out of the
in.
background
Yeah.
quietly. Um, and then one interesting thing is that this exact, well, I don't know if it's this exact sound, but us basically this sound is what will start the first like 5 minutes of the following Microphones album, Mount Erie. So whereas this
Ah.
album ends with this kind of silence, then Mount Erie starts with the same thing, including the foghorn and including the I Want Wind to Blow kind of loop happening in there. So they're almost literally tied together in a way. Like you can play one right after the other without really skipping a beat.
That's cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
I haven't listened to Mount Erie enough, but I'll be more well versed on it by next week.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I guess before we start talking about Mount Erie, is there anything else you want to talk about on the Glow Part 2? Any other major points you feel like we've not gone in depth enough?
Maybe just some like I don't know, broad strokes, like
Yeah.
not about the songs, but um oh, actually no, I did I wanted to talk about the moon just a tiny bit more.
Go
There's
for
like
it.
this is also kind of a point about the album in general, but he like his different vocalizations throughout this record are all just so clear and like expressive to me and there's this moment on the moon where he finishes a line and then just lets out this really kind of forceful hum and it just absolutely speaks without words. Like I just feel like I understand what he's feeling and communicating there without him needing to muddy it by translating it into English.
Yeah, there's a lot of that on here. Just kind of
Yeah,
like, I know what you mean. Emotion without being like explicitly emotional.
yeah. He
Um,
does a lot of wailing.
yeah, he really does. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess some broad strokes are like probably things that I've said at some point during this episode, but I really like the just the way that it presents itself as being kind of uh, cluttered and like tossed together randomly, and it's got a sort of it sort of sounds like at first listen like they're kind of demos that are tossed together or something. But the more you listen to it and like the more you kind of like listen openly to it, the more focused it becomes, and the more you kind of notice that everything is very intentional and very planned.
Yeah,
And it's arranged to sound unarranged in a weird way.
yeah. It does
Uh,
it. It flows so well though. Like we said earlier, it's the whole thing is kind of a medley.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's all none of the songs really sound the same, but they all sound like they belong together
Yeah.
in a coherent unit.
Yeah.
It's very just haunting, and immense sounding. He gets to these adjectives through different avenues, but he always ends up kind of there, at the just really like big and immense moving, just like, I don't know. What are some more adjectives?
uh there's a there's a litany.
Yeah, I mean, existential. That's a good one.
Pretty,
Pretty.
also ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Winter. It's not an adjective, but
Sure. Yeah,
you know,
wintry.
wintry. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Autumnal. Both seasons.
Sure.
Why not?
Any season. I got
Any
into this
season.
album in the summer.
Yeah. It sounds like all the seasons at once.
Yeah.
Well, also sounding like all the individual seasons.
Yeah.
There you go. This podcast was always going to be
Just
sort of a mess, but
yeah. Oh yeah.
um, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think you can't expect it not to be, or at least you shouldn't have expected it not to be.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I know it's. I mean, it's definitely one of both of our favorite albums of all time. Like
Oh,
up
for
in like
sure.
the highest echelons of favorite album hood. So
Yeah. I would
I,
say I've got like four that are just all kind of
yeah,
same playing field, and this is one of them for me.
and once an album kind of gets to that point, it's really hard to talk about it objectively and to describe why you like it so much,
Yeah.
other than
I
just saying, listen to it, it's fucking good.
yeah. Just reading the lyrics verbatim.
Yeah, just like don't even listen to it and just read the lyrics and you'll
Yeah.
be fine.
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I've had thoughts like a while ago. I kind of had an idea to do this discography breakdown side podcast thing, and I wanted to do it on Radiohead or like I wanted to do like um a retrospective episode on Kid A, but I never know how to say even a single fucking thing about Kid A.
Yeah, it's just one of those
It's just a
things.
brick wall for me to run into.
It's really hard to articulate these things.
Yeah.
I think we did our best. It is hard. I feel like you maybe rely a little too much on sort of the like more objective side of things. The things that you can talk about and describe
Yeah.
aren't necessarily the same things as what makes you so like attached to it.
Yeah.
Because those things are sort of like nebulous and you can't really pin them down. But I guess it's a very important album to a lot of people. As far as I can tell, or as far as I've seen. So if you haven't listened to it, you gotta go listen to it. Like,
It's
what are you listening to this for?
yeah. So, it's a classic.
It's a classic. Um, yeah,
That being
that's
said, we're doing this podcast because we love his whole discography for the most part.
mhm,
Um, there's you know there's so much to dig into, and
there is.
even though not everything like pans out as like elegantly or expertly as this album might, there's still just so much to it and so much like heart put into all of his projects.
Yeah, and like there are other like I don't know if it seems like this is sort of everybody's favorite Phil Elverum project. There are other Microphones in Mount Erie albums that I also think are perfect. So there's
Oh
not
yeah. Yeah.
it's not like all downhill from here or anything.
No, absolutely
Uh,
not. Like
there's some great stuff in the future still.
So many artists have like kind of their consensus album in like the first half of their discography, but I don't know. I've never felt like I always feel like the artists can often be like unfairly defined by that record, I guess.
Totally,
And
totally.
like I mean in my opinion, like two of Phil's absolute best albums are Sauna and A Crow Looked at Me, which came in like his second decade, you know?
Yeah, which came out like you
Yeah.
said, like whole 15 years after this album that we're talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah, so I feel like that sort of wraps up the Glow Part 2 stuff. Just as far as some like general housekeeping information, what is our next episode? I keep forgetting to keep track of these. I think
It is Mount Erie.
it is Mount Erie. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Mount Erie.
And then
There will
after that we're doing Song Islands and Live in Japan.
Song Islands and Long in Japan. I'm excited to talk about all three of those. We'll also during some episodes we will have
Some
certain other
guests.
guests with us
Yes, we are going to start bringing other people on.
which is a good idea, I think. Definitely widen some perspectives.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a good time.
I think our first scheduled guest is Maddie. Maybe.
Maddie coming
Yeah.
on for No
Yeah.
Flashlight.
Grand Emperor of the Indie Heads podcast.
Yes,
Making a formal appearance.
he will grace us on that episode. All right. Well, I feel like we should probably like get out of here.
Yeah. This is like about as long as our regular podcast.
Wow, we did it. We really did it.
we
I'll edit a good deal of this out.
Oh, for sure.
There's some gaps in there, but
Yeah.
overall, yeah, we did it.
Okay.
All right.
I will stop that there recording.
All right. Goodbye.